Aviation. It's very impressive. And to stand there and look at the lunar module with this guy next to it, that's a pretty cool moment. As a historian, it's very special to work with Fred when we worked on his book. Not only is he a historical character himself, but his fingerprints are all over history. And if you look at, it started with his grandfather. When he talked to his grandfather about, his grandfather was at Abe Lincoln's funeral in Illinois. And he talked about a poem, was it Fred, that he read? Yeah. So you look at those early connections with history. He grew up in the Depression. He had some of his first jobs in World War II, shoe shining and taking advantage of all the soldiers being there. Then a newspaper boy, and he was going to go into journalism and finding this book. And that changed first time he flew, which happens a lot. But he flew with Chuck Yeager. Took him on, it was a check ride of some kind, wasn't it? You're checking out a plane of some sort.
You go fly the lifting body.
Lifting body, yeah. And gosh, he was on the backup crew for Apollo 8, the first mission around the moon. He was on the backup crew for Apollo 11, the first landing on the moon. And then he flew that mission, Apollo 13. But he also flew the approach and landing test of the space shuttle, the Enterprise. And I'm sure he'll talk about that. But that was a significant moment for him as well. So you just know that when you're working on a project with someone with these kind of connections in history, you know it's going to be good. So it was a real pleasure on my part to work with him, and I do appreciate it, Fred. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you talk a little bit about your career.
Thank you. Well, that's quite an audience tonight. One thing you did mention is I had 17 years with Grumman. I guess the last 2 years was Marcus Grumman. I had 4 years when I started with Grumman here on Long Island out at Bethpage. So I had some great years and interesting and challenging years during those times as well. The book is called Never Panic Early, and I think most people think of it immediately as it fits what's on I think it's not on the screen yet, we can put it up, of Apollo 13, and that certainly was a Never Panic event. But it really fits many, many things throughout our lives and things we run into with children have problems or accidents, or we are in a car accident. And it's really also was used in a movie. At one time, Gene Kranz talked to his controllers who were talking back and forth and a little bit confused what happened after the explosion. And he told them, settle down, just don't do anything rash. He says, think about it, work it, so you don't do anything to make it worse. And so that's the thought of Never Panic Early, is to consider when you have this problem case not to do something instantly. If you can take the time, think about what's the best course of action and what to do next. And that certainly was a 4-day story of Apollo 13, 6 days, was exactly that for a lot of people. More on the ground by far than they showed in the movie. Incredible number of people that had to work those issues. But at any rate, I don't have the clicker here. Here it is. Okay. This was the crew. Incidentally, it was not the crew initially. We trained for the mission. Ken Mattingly was the command module pilot. We had been, we should have known something was going to be wrong with Apollo 13. When the week of launch, we were all exposed with measles from Charlie Duke having gone to a birthday party with his son. And Ken Mattingly was judged susceptible to come down with measles. So 2.5 days before launch, we changed out a crewman. Jack Schweigert in the middle there replaced Ken. Now, the movie kind of spoke ill of that. Kind of said Jack, because we worried about Jack couldn't perform the mission. That was not the case. When you perform as a backup, as I had done in 2 previous cycles, you train as if you're going to go fly the flight. You do everything the prime crew does. You literally, in those days, you could have changed out the entire crew the week of launch and it wouldn't have mattered. The mission would have gone on and performed as expected. So it wasn't that. It was a personal, obviously, horrible disappointment for Tim Mattingly that late in the game to be yanked away. And, of course, Jack was kind of surprised he didn't have time to invite people to his launch that he might have wanted, his family or friends. And we were allowed to carry a personal preference kit. These were items that you would, and I spent several months calling family and friends to see what they might want me to fly for them on the mission. It was very limited in volume and weight to carry for them. And for instance, my favorite aunt wanted me to carry her rosary beads, and I was too bulky and too much space, took up too much space, so I took the crucifix off and flew that. Probably during the flight it would have been nice to have the rosary beads. But at any rate, Jack didn't have time to do that. So he didn't have time to take things he might have wanted to for family and friends on the flight. But we got off, and what happened? There we go. We took off on April 13th, or April 11th rather, at 13:13. And a lot of 13s were involved in that launch. But the launch itself went well. It's a rider of Saturn V for a fighter pilot, and that's flown a lot of hours and a lot of military aircraft through most of the Century series by this time. It really is not that big a kick in the pants. It's an all liquid system, 5 liquid rockets lift you off, and much smoother than, say, Space Shuttle, which has solids, or the new rocket will have solids that give you a bigger kick in the pants coming off the pad, faster acceleration. But it was very herky-jerky. The 4 outer engines, which are big, 8.5 pounds thrust each, when they swiveled left and right, 4.5, to guide the rocket, that was exaggerated when you're way up on the tippy top in that little capsule. You get jerked around a lot. Some people have described it like being on a train and got off the tracks. And so it's a rough ride that way. G levels, though, are fairly modest. Even at shutdown on the first stage, we peaked at 4.5 Gs. Fighter airplanes I flew were, you fly around combat maneuvering, practicing 7 Gs. Today's fighters can do 9 Gs. So the thrust levels wasn't that high on the rocket. We did have a failure on the second stage through POGO, a fluid instability in the feed system, that the computer on the rocket actually shut down the center engine on the second stage a couple of minutes early. Because with that POGO, it was buried in the thrust, and unfortunately it did. I was told later by the fellow, Dick Smith, who had the program at that time, he said if you're going too many more cycles, it would start breaking up the structure. And that cruciform structure that engine was held on. So I was lucky the auto system did its trick and shut it down. We used a little more fuel getting into orbit, but still had enough fuel to leave the Earth using the third engine the second time, the single engine on the third stage the second time. That was what worried us most at that time. We had, out of the POGO, we had a slight vibration, chugging, if you will. You feel the vibration acceleration change. But wasn't that traumatic, and mainly worried we were going to have used too much fuel and couldn't go to the moon. Be stuck with an Earth orbital mission. But that didn't transpire. We were on our way and had a great mission. I think Mission Control at one time called us, Joe Kerwin, and said we were boring them to tears down there. The mission was going so good. Well, that changed. We had this picture is mainly to show you the view. There's a couple of things that were most unusual to me in flying in space. One was what you saw out the window. Even from Earth orbit, or certainly here where we're looking back at Earth, I guess we were out about 20,000, 30,000 miles out on our way to the moon. And that, what you're looking at there, that brown area is Mexico and Southern California. In fact, there's a white streak on a mountain range there in California, that's snow. And of course, you can see the large cloud patterns in the blue of the Pacific Ocean to the left there. So that's just like unreal. I mean, when I first started looking at that kind of stuff, I said, oh, boy, am I really here? We did have a planned TV show that's shown here, and what they're observing me in Mission Control. We kind of did a show and tell. We took objects in the lunar module out to talk about. We knew they had not been discussed on previous flights, and there were a couple of new items on our mission we talked about, Jim Lovell and I. And the networks, as it turned out, didn't carry it. The people at Mission Control will enjoy it. And shortly after we turned off and said good night, God bless all, and whatever, Jim Lovell turned the show off, that explosion happened. This would have been 30 minutes later, we'd have been on live TV when the oxygen tank exploded. But anyway, Jim had already started back up toward the command module through the tunnel, connecting the two vehicles, and I was still down putting away equipment we had pulled out for the show. When I heard the bang, which had a metallic ring to it, it was kind of like being in a big oil drum and so many pounds on the side of the sledgehammer. And the other thing unusual was the firing of jets, the small 100-pound thrusters that hold your attitude were firing sporadically, which was unusual. They were trying to hold attitude from the torque and the thrust that had been imparted from that explosion. It ripped a quarter of the service module off, ripped the big panel off, 1/4 of the vehicle, and that gave a torquing motion to the combined vehicles, and those thrusters were fighting to hold attitude. So from there, I drifted up into the command module and knew pretty immediately, within a minute, scanning the panel from the readings in several meters, that we had lost oxygen tank 2. Now, that was not frightening from a life-threatening situation because we had tank 1, I thought. It looked good. But unfortunately, it had developed a slow leak, and for the next 50 minutes, a little over, we were fighting different things to try to isolate that leak in that second tank. Now, you have to realize there was no procedure to handle this situation. So the mission controllers, when I listened to the inner loops in mission control, 25 years later probably, I got those dug out and listened. They had to ad-lib everything they were doing in that real time. There was no book. For most normal thought-to-be failures, we had procedures. They had books already figured out. But for this, they were ad-libbing it all the way. And they were mainly, what impressed me was they were worried about turning off, then when they got ready to turn off the vehicle, what to turn off in the mothership, which was never planned to be ever turned off, so there was no procedure how to turn it off, to not damage anything. In other words, in their minds, they were saying, we're going to really get back and we'll power this thing up and get back through an entry. And we want to make sure it's able to do that. So they always had, they had probably more optimism than I had at that point. But at any rate, that was what was going on in that period, like I said, over 50 minutes. Jim Lovell and I left when we knew the mothership was gone, and we powered it down completely, and went to the lunar module, 11-7, Aquarius, and went through a very hurried power-up, which normally took maybe up to a couple hours. But we shortchanged the checklist. We had an activation checklist. And as I was going through it, talking with Jack Lausma, who's the Capcom, I just tell him I'm putting big X's through certain pages and steps which I knew were not needed. We weren't going to do a rendezvous, so I didn't need a rendezvous radar. We weren't going to land, so I didn't need a landing radar. So we're just short-circuiting some of the systems that we knew there was no point in even trying to power them up. So we got through a lot more quickly with the LEM activation. So we had a home. We had a place to hang out for now. I didn't quite sure how long we would have to hang out. But we had communication to talk to people. We had environmental system. We had attitude control. And we had some food. So what else you need, right? So at any rate, this went on for some time. And the most serious problem, though, now the mothership shut down. We're in the LEM. And if you look at that trajectories, 2 of them, the one that swings around the corner in the moon and the near side and misses the Earth, that's the path we were on. If we had done nothing at that point, we would have not gotten back to Earth. We'd have missed it by quite a ways. And so the very first maneuver that was made at 60 hours something there on the scene was to get us back on the path to get back. Now, Glenn Lundy had taken over from Gene Kranz, his team in Mission Control, and one of the guidance officers asked, where do you want Gene, where do you want me to put him? He had to figure trajectory and maneuver to do to get us back pointed in the right direction, sort of. And Glenn just told him, get him back somewhere on Earth. So that was his marching orders. And they figured out that first maneuver that was going to have us splashing down by Madagascar over in the Indian Ocean where there was no recovery force. But that was all right. We were going to be back to Earth. So we went along, and meanwhile they were scratching their heads as we went around toward the backside of the moon. Now we're going to pass around the backside at about 130 miles. And they figured out another maneuver, the biggest one we made 2 hours after we passed the high point behind the moon. That was a very long maneuver using the descent engine. Second time we're using it. The engine we would use to land on the moon to get us back now on a path that did three things for us. It got us back to about the Samoan Islands and the South Pacific, where there was an aircraft carrier, the Iwo Jima, to effect a recovery. Secondly, it cut 10 hours off the return. So we bought some time on our consumables. The LIM had very limited consumables. We meant to operate 2 days, and we're now stretching it to operate 4 days. So it had only battery power, and the most critical thing I didn't think of, you see a picture of it later, was the lithium cartridge. But anyway, it bought us some time on consumables getting back. And the third thing was we would drop the LIM in the deep water at that point where we got supposedly splashed down. There was deep water in the Pacific because we had a nuclear RTG on board the LIM. Those were used when we landed to power up the instrument package we were going to set up on the LIM. We were going to set up this set of experiments, and the main power source was an RTG nuclear core. So we had that on the LIM, and the nuclear energy department was happy we were going to find a deep place in the ocean to park the LIM with that RTG on board. So anyway, we did several more mid-courses. You see the last two, one was with the descent engine, and one was with just the four of the 100-pound thrusters, the attitude thrusters, fired in one direction to tweak the maneuver to get us closer to the center of the path for entry. This chart I use, this was what we call the burn chart, where some of those maneuvers were up on the more formal part of the chart. In the bottom you see hand scratching. I use this a lot when I'm talking particularly to elementary school children, and tell them that arithmetic is important. Calculator. Because those figures at the bottom is at the first breath we got after that first maneuver that got us headed back around the moon. Jim Lovell asked me to compute our consumables. And so I computed primarily water and electric power. Then we had lots of oxygen. We had 2 full backpacks, things we used when we landed on the moon, full of oxygen. So we had lots of oxygen for the 4 days. So I computed water and power based on an assumption we could go down to 18 amps in the lunar module. That's what my figure was. Use this for these calculations. But all just grocery store arithmetic. And like I said, I like to use this chart with young children. We went around the backside. This is from the higher altitude. All the missions went in at 60 miles altitude above the moon. We were in a set over a little over 130, so we got a broader view of the backside, which you can see doesn't look too much like the front side. That was one large dark area. That's Tsiolkovsky. He was a rocket early research and designer in Russia. Russia sent a craft around the moon first and shot pictures, so they got naming rights early. And beautiful feature, though, as you can see, with a dark area with a large crater and a mountain left in the center portion. And similarly, the other large feature we saw on the backside was this older feature. And gradually, the moon gets beat up constantly every day. It hit with something, a small particle. And it strews debris around and kind of half filled this crater, which was named the Sea of Moscow. As you know, you only get to see one side of the moon. The side facing us has those very large dark areas. Some people can picture a face in the moon. So this is some more of the backside, just crater upon crater upon crater. You're looking over the skirt below of the capsule. I'm looking through the lunar module window, looking down at the moon, shooting this picture. Now this was the consumable I did not think about, dumbly, was scrubbing the air of carbon dioxide with lithium cartridges. The limb had them, but they were different shape, and there wasn't many of them. In fact, our spares were down on the decent stage, which we were going to retrieve when we went out on an EVA and bring them back upstairs on the first EVA. So we didn't even have access to the limb spares, but they wouldn't have been enough either. But the command module had an abundance of these square-looking ones. The limbs were kind of cylindrical. So the people on the ground in Building 7 at Johnson knew what we had on board, and we happened to have gray tape, old duct tape. And we had it really to clean filters. It was a good way when you wanted to clean filters in mainly your environmental system. You could use the tape to clean off any debris and stuff. So that was the main purpose of having that gray tape on board. But it served well in creating this, what they call the mailbox, that square object with gray tape around it, with a sock, two socks plugging one end, and the other end plugged into an intake hose on the lunar module environmental system. So it forced the air to get sucked through that cartridge and cleanse the air of the buildup of carbon dioxide. And we had later had one more cartridge. We just stuck it onto that one and taped it. So we could have just kept stacking on these cartridges. This is to give you this is my coming into the lunar module. And you can see it's pretty open there. You can see a wire bundle up there to the left. The limb had no inner walls. Weight was the toughest weight problem I think of any flying vehicle ever had to make was the lunar module. It was an extremely tough problem with a really delicate wire, 18 gauge wiring for a lot of the wiring, and very delicate, but they put netting up for the inner walls just to keep us from hitting against the wire bundles. And the plumbing, the same way. You could look through the wiring and look at wire plumbing. Kind of convenient setup maybe we'll have in our houses to get the things to work on. But at any rate, that's the way the limb was. And so this just shows me a zero gravity coming back through the tunnel. I'm coming out of the tunnel that went up to the capsule. So I'm coming back into Aquarius at this point. And that was euphoric. The most unusual thing, other than the pictures and the scenes you saw, was floating around yourself, or floating objects. It was kind of, like I said, a euphoric experience. We did survive entry. It was kind of a miraculous thing in itself. First of all, one thing that was impressive was Jack and I, Jack was the command module pilot. We were going to power up the capsule and got ready to power it up. And Jim was staying the limb to hold attitude control, to maintain communication. And when we went in there, and they would not allow us to, we went in at probably about 3 hours before we were going to hit the air. 3 hours before we were going to enter. And they would not allow us to start the power up until 2.5 hours before we were going to hit the air at 25,000 miles an hour. Yeah. So we crawled into this dead, cold tomb, water everywhere. The instrument panel was covered with water. Jack got out 2 towels and threw one, tossed one over to me, and we wiped off the instrument panels so we could see the meters. And then Jack got to thinking about the water behind the panels. And of course, we had a fire, electric short, a fire in the capsule that killed the crew on Apollo 1. Now, they had done extensive rewiring and wiring protocol imposed, not just on the capsule where the crew had been killed, but also on the lunar module. And so the rewiring had been extensive for, how long between the wiring. They had to have a clamp. The clamp had to be perfectly round, not egg-shaped. All connectors had to be hermetically sealed. So that made them all waterproof. But Jack worried about that. So in the first steps we had on this top power up, was to push in all the circuit breakers, and there were panels on each side of the capsule. Was just a big circuit breaker panel. Jack says, well, he said, I'll give you a countdown, and let's just go down each row and push only 6 circuit breakers in at a time and stop. And then we'll see if we smell any insulation burning. So that's the way we went through the thought of that activation. Well, we eventually got all the circuit breakers in and nothing was smoking, no starts. So we continued with the power. The miracle was we obviously had frozen that spacecraft. The water tanks were frozen. They were still frozen when they captured the capsule back on the ship. On the hangar deck and inspected it, the water tanks were still frozen. So we had obviously exceeded the specifications on every piece of electronics in that vehicle. Yet it came to life, fully powered up the computer. Jack set it up, got a star sighting for accurate attitude. We set it for entry, and he set it up for auto to fly through the computer. And of course, they're always ready to take over if it goes astray, but it flew with the computer to this splashdown, you see, and ended up on the records, if you look at the total Apollo program, tied for the second most accurate splashdown in the program. It abused the vehicle, and yet it did what it did. And there we are coming triumphantly on board the Iwo Jima aircraft carrier, which actually had been on combat duty in Vietnam and swung by on its way back to San Diego to retrieve us with trained Navy divers. Now, another one of those never panic early situations, I was flying with a group that did air shows. The time was called the Confederate Air Force, and we staged the attack on Pearl Harbor as kind of the opening act of these air shows we did at Galveston, at Dallas, Fort Worth, more in South Texas area. And I flew this Val aircraft, a Japanese look-alike Val, which is a dive bomber. It had fixed gear, fixed landing gear, and fancy pants on it to look like the Val. And we actually had metallic clamps on the oleos so that it couldn't stroke. So to do landings, you had to be very careful on landings because the tires were your only shock absorber. So at any rate, I was flying this aircraft one day, actually transporting it from a crop duster's field where we kept it to Shoals Field in Galveston to get ready for the washer rack to get ready for the next air show. And I had an engine failure at about 300 foot in the air. And I could work the wobble pump, switch tanks, and that's where you think about getting this never panic early. What's the next steps? So I thought, well, it's switch fuel tanks to another wing, 2 wing tanks. And there's a wobble pump, a hand wobble pump you could pump, and I was frantically pumping that. And I could get the engine to sputter off and on. It sputtered a while. So I managed to get around 360 degrees, not 360, 180 degrees, to land on the west side of the Galveston Shoals Airport, obviously not a runway. One of the gears went into a rough spot and broke and failed, and it swiveled and a wing dug in and it flipped, and I ended up going upside down backwards. So when I stopped, I was actually going to the left. And I was trapped for a while in the cockpit. As a result, before I could get my unbuckle and swivel and kick a hole through the canopy, I received burns over 65%. This is both arms are about the same, and the legs. So it's another one of those never panic early that had a bad sense result. But in a way, it was one of these, again, life things where really a shocking occasion to me because I've been in good health all my life. And of course, I was thinking of my career. And they had me on critical list for the first couple of weeks where they worry about your breathing, hot gases, and your respiratory system. And I got cleared from that, and I had a meeting with the doctors. The doctors doing the grafting was the Shrine doctors at the University of Houston, Shrine Institute, who partnered with the University of Texas Hospital in Galveston to service the adult burn ward. So I got with Dr. Larson, who was the Shrine doctor that would eventually do the grafting, and the internist from the UT hospital. Incidentally, I never told him I went to the University of Oklahoma.
That was good.
But I told him I want to get back to flight status. And I said, what do we got to do maybe different than you normally do? And the one thing was, for the leg grafts, which went all around the legs, they can't have pressure on them after grafting for 5 days. And they normally would have put a pin through my ankles to hold my legs up to get through that period. And so I got the crew systems and the suit techs really. Got sandals for my wife, and they rigged Velcro on the feet of those, and put matching Velcro on a board they put at the end of the bed. So I could clamp my feet into the Velcro, good old space Velcro saved the day. And so that's the way I had to do it for 5 days to keep my legs off the bed and get through that to finally get to the point they could take the wraps off and look at the grafts. So anyway, it took 14 months with some physical therapy to get a couple of joints that had burns all the way around, and it stiffened things up with scar tissue to get loosened up, and got back to flight status, and was named, this accident happened in 1973, and in 1976, I was named as one of the 2 crews that would get to fly the Space Shuttle Enterprise. And it was myself on the right. On the right is Gordon Fullerton, who was my pilot with me. On the left is Joe Engel and Dick Truly. And we're in the Rockwell facility at Palmdale, California with Enterprise behind us. And so a carrier rocket, though it was not a rocket, it was a 747 aircraft. And it would get us up to, approximately get up to about 30,000 feet, install a pushover, and we could normally get released by about 25,000 feet. No engines, so we're a glider, and we'd do test patterns and procedures on the way down to a landing on the big dry lake at Edwards Air Force Base. This was called the Approach and Landing Test in 1977. We flew 8 flights, 3 captive, 5 flights where we separated, and I got to command 5 of the 8 flights we flew on Enterprise. And this is the very first landing of a space shuttle on the long runway on Rogers Dry Lake. It's southbound. That's about 8 miles long on that dry lake. The black streets are just poured asphalt to give you alignment for a runway alignment. And you see T-38 chase aircraft to let me know the gear had come down okay. One thing I've done is with the book is a lot of people have complained that are call it true space fans, that my book was too short. And through the Smithsonian Press, we did get quite a few pages deleted that they thought the general public in general would not understand or not appreciate. So I've created a website. At the bottom there is fredhaise.space. www.fredhaise.space. Space is a new domain, like .com and .space. And with each section, it kind of covers the span of the book, not exactly matching, but has narrative, has some pictures. Again, when you write a book, they don't allow too many pictures. So we had to think carefully about what we put in the book. And so here I freelanced and put a lot of pictures and through the sections. People at Grumman will appreciate the archival data, where I talked to that episode where I spent over a year here at Bethpage testing lunar modules. In fact, I was in the first time power was put to a lunar module, I was in it from limb 2 through limb 6. The first day we put power on any of those limbs. And so I wrote a diary, a daily diary, for almost those 14 months. I was working during that period, which is a very, very intense period, difficult period. A lot of sacrifice by workers, the work ethic and test operations. 1967, we went 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We shut down one shift in February, where most of that shift could not get into work because of snow, and we shut down Christmas Day. And that was it, 1967. 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. One day planned off, Christmas Day. So that was the intensity going on. It was very hard on families. A lot of sacrifice for people to get the job done. Which obviously I appreciate. But at any rate, it carries that kind of thing, carries a lot of memos, carries memos Ed Mitchell and I wrote to Jimmy Tibbet, who was going to fly the very first limb to kind of give him status on the vehicle, limb 3. So all of that's in this website, a lot of pictures. And so anybody's free to go check that out as well, to augment, I look at it as an augmentation to the book. So anyway, I thought now I've talked too much probably. We ought to open it up maybe for questions. I don't know if we get questions from the group about anything. Yeah.
What do you think of today's shuttles, like from Elon Musk?
What do I think of today's shuttle?
Yeah, like the going to the moon.
Oh, you're talking about Artemis,
Yeah.
which doesn't really have a shuttle. So Artemis is a different architecture that we use to go to the moon because they're thinking of the lunar, longer term, lunar base. So like they have one vehicle that's in a very big orbit around the moon. That's a stable orbit. That's actually it's a 6-day period looping around the moon that can be there for a long, long time. And a feature like that, they're using a little complication compared to ours. They're using 3 rockets to get the job done. 2 SpaceX and 1 the big new rocket that's equivalent of the Saturn V to support that mission. The lander, I think, has not been fully decided yet. It got into a contract dispute, and I have not seen the ultimate design of the lander. There will be a lander similar to the LEM to do the job of actually going from lunar orbit down to the surface. They have plans to land, I think, near the South Pole, where an orbiter has detected, a lunar orbiter has detected water possibility available in some of the submerged crater areas that look dark areas that never see sunlight, for instance. And so they hope to land in that kind of an area where water obviously is a resource that would be good not just to live off of, but to manufacture ultimately fuel to think of going further from the moon. So it's better built around a different than just go up there and pick a few rocks and fill up a rock box. It's looked at as architecture is to enable you to fly more missions and eventually build a more permanent feature on the moon to go back and forth to for exploration and a living area. It's going to be a complicated logistics problem, much more so than say our bases that you operate year-round in Antarctica. Essentially, not too long ago, about 3 months ago, I had a hookup with Antarctica Station, a Zoom call. People, I was in Houston, and it was 95 degrees. They told me that day they were 71 degrees below zero. But they have a similar problem of logistics support to keep, they operate 365 days a year down there. So that's the facets of Artemis. The otherwise, the problem any program worries about, be it NASA, be it Air Force with a new program, Navy with a major procurement, is how that passes through Congress for budget. Without the dollars to support this program, it's going to happen. And I worry about right now we're facing a midterm coming up, and NASA has to go through the gauntlet of several committees to solidify the budget, and of course there's likely to be a lot of changes in the House side in particular of who's in those committees. And NASA has to re-educate to support what they're trying to do. But that's a never-ending thing, just a matter of the way our government works. That, like I said, the military faces that, the government faces that on major programs. Yes, sir.
Spoken a lot about your fire. I'd like to know, did it make any noise when it wasn't twisting and firing? Before the accident, did it make any noise when it was
before our explosion?
Yeah.
No. No, we had, obviously, we had no inclination of what was going to happen when Jack threw the switches. That's another thing. The movie had us be arguing with Jack about throwing the switches. If I'd have been in the capsule in my normal position, I would have thrown the switches to stir the cryos that caused the electric shock. Well, you hear pumps running. You can hear the water pump, the cooling pump running. We have a cabin fan, and you get a cabin fan running. The limb is noisier than the command module because, again, it has no inner walls. It's just an outer thin shell. And so the limb tended to be a little noisier vehicle. What's that? The fan and pump noise. And interestingly, I don't know if it's the kind of fluid they had, the different glycol fluid for cooling. The limb pump for glycol cooling changed frequency, kind of whined and then changed frequency. That had Jack Schweigert worried when he came into the limb. Jack had never been in a lunar module in his life until his life. He was the command module expert. So he spent all his time in California worried about the capsule and service module. And he listened to that and he said, is this thing gonna make it?
First of all, thank you so much for coming. I think I speak for everyone when I say we're all just thrilled to have you here. So thank you.
Thank you.
My question is this: do you think the long-term future of space exploration is going to be more public sector, private sector, or some kind of marriage between the two, like we're starting to see now?
Well, where it's obviously economically feasible, you do it like the partnership that has now. And your SpaceX is not doing it on their own. I mean, they're being paid to do it. But they have a very dependable rocket. In fact, it's been so successful that they've reused one of the first stages, I think, 9 times. And so they could do it cheaper. The only thing I worry about SpaceX is complacency. They've been almost too successful. Always, when you're that successful, you worry. That the workers are going to let down, quality is going to let down, something like that. So they've been highly successful. But as far as the theme of going to explore, be it go to Mars, or go explore the manned or unmanned, go explore the moons of Jupiter, or go to the one that's interesting at Saturn, that's something beyond what a private company would do. I mean, it has to be really, I say, an Earth interest, either by some government, particular nation that's out front, or you would hope, as it is in Artemis, is a collaboration with European Space Agency. They supply some portions of that system. So you'd hope it's a collaboration, ultimately. I would hope in the long range that all of us could work together to get the best talent to work the program and the resources that would be shared to do those future further out explorations.
Thank you very much.
I was there in '67 when Joe Gavin used to have his stand-up morning meetings daily, and Tom Kelly was known as the father of the lunar module. Can you share any memories of Joe Gavin and Tom Kelly?
Well, Joe remembered management through the management meetings. Frankly, I didn't attend that much. That is true. I was more involved in the actual testing, so more involved with Tom Kelly and the cohorts that he worked with on getting it was a very problem for Grumman in several ways. The same thing was faced with an North American was the dramatic requirement for new employees. Grumman grew in that short period 7,000 new people. Most of these people couldn't spell tests. A lot of them not are involved in that kind of environment. NASA imposed on them a strange new paper system of DRs, OCPs, written in a certain way that was strange compared to the aircraft test world. So even the old-time Grummonites, had to learn that new, quote, NASA system that was now imposed on them. So there was a sort of a learning as you go period there in the early part of the LIM operation and talking about the testing environment. And so we had a lot of retests that could have been avoided. We were also hurt by subsystem component delays. Subsystem deliveries were late, so we're often having to do a test with not all the pieces in place. And Grumman was driven by NASA to hold a test on a certain date. It was bad. Grumman got credit for starting the test, even though if you really would have done it right, you'd have waited until you got all the pieces. But now you'd have to do a retest. So you kind of wasted time through that cycle. So a lot of that was going on. So it was a difficult time, really, early state of that year, probably about the first half year in that learning curve, get through that learning curve.
You have the opportunity to take a suborbital flight of New Origin with the Galactic, you were invited to go.
No, sir. Number one, they told me I had trouble getting up on the stage. Neuropathy in my feet and high blood pressure, which I control pretty well, but it's not as easy for a younger person's game. So I wish them well.
Higher up? How about you? Yeah.
So, the three of you
thinks the movie was saying.
traveled farther from the Earth than anybody had or has since. What was it like on the far side of the moon, being that far away from anybody? Was it a moment where everybody just felt contemplation?
The record part you're talking about wasn't obvious at the time. We were high. It gave us a broader view of the backside. We could see more area, a larger portion of the backside than anybody had seen because of the altitude. Now, the reason we had the record was two things. One, at the time we arrived at the moon and its orbit does not go in a perfect circle. It's a slight ellipse. And so at the time we were there at that higher altitude, the moon was a little further away from Earth. That's one of its farthest points away from the Earth, the moon itself. So that's what put us, furthest away. It wasn't anything we were shooting for as an altitude. I was just soon as landed on the moon. But no, it gave us that great picture and those great shots. A fellow that was a lunar geologist that trained us a lot from the lunar orbit and what we would see and what we should try to collect samples, shoot pictures of, and what Farooq Almaz was his name. I think he wanted to make us feel better. He said we got the best shots any flight ever got of some of those features I showed. I think he was just trying to make us feel good.
I want to add something to that. Jim Lovell sent an email and he wanted Fred to be sure to mention that record in the book. Yes, sir.
Will the original Apollo sites be preserved or will any be revisited as Artemis
I couldn't hear you, sorry.
Will the original Apollo landing sites, will any of them be revisited with Artemis? Or will they be preserved as historical?
Any of the original landing sites, will they be revisited?
Oh, I would doubt they'd do that just for that purpose. No, the landings were done with scantily looked at. You want to look at the whole moon. There's such an age difference in the features on the moon. If you look at the craters, and there's almost like eons. For whatever reason, there were eons of more heavily bombardment of meteors hitting the moon. And some are like, billions of years apart and when they struck. And so their interest obviously was not just of the features themselves, but of what they uncovered, because when a meteor hits, it brings up a lot of stuff from depth. So you can get some stratigraphy information from what you might collect out of the various craters. But we just touched the moon in that sense. But no, the moon itself, if you had the base, of course, offers the extraordinary ability to look outward. Not going outward, but if you can put the right instruments there Just as we've done with the telescope, the great telescopes, with our space telescope and Webb, we put them up in orbit to look because they could get away from our atmosphere. Well, the moon has no atmosphere, so you could put even bigger things on the moon to look outward that have no atmosphere to bother the viewing of these instruments. So it's a great place in that sense for land, we call it land-based science from the moon. But people talk about it as maybe a staging place for the visit trips to Mars. That's a very difficult mission. It's, that Mars is so far away. It's right now with current technology, it's about an eight-month trip, one way, 8 months back, and however long you're going to stay there and do things. I know Elon Musk is supposed to put 1 billion people on Mars or something, sometime or the other, but that's a much more difficult logistic problem than thinking about trying to handle it with the moon. So I don't know. I'm sure I won't see it in my lifetime, but I don't want to stop. I hope people don't stop. It's one of the goodness humans can do with their brains and their resources and ability that we've been blessed with human beings. That in some cases we're using it in the wrong direction every day. But that's I call a good thing to do, to understand the Creator's creation of the universe and how we've been blessed to be at least a livable part of it at this point as far as we know. So I hope we in some way continue it, whether it's U.S., China, Russia, or whoever. I hope they press on outward.
That's a good one to end with. I think that sums it up.
So did you have a good time? Yeah. All right, so while I mentioned that this is the last year we'll be honoring the 50th anniversary, it doesn't mean we will be forgetting Apollo. When opportunities present themselves, we'll be bringing back astronauts just like this, but we'll also be focusing on the new breed of astronauts. There's a new young lady from Baldwin who may be one of the next people to walk on the moon. That's Jasmine Mogbelli, who went to Baldwin School District. So the future is bright. Long Island will be a part of it. And we want to thank you all for coming. If you can, because this is a pretty steep stairs here, if you're up towards the top, you may want to exit through the top and then take the elevator down. It might be a little bit easier for you. But otherwise, safe home. Thanks for coming tonight. And what did you think of the picture of the moon? So remember, if you liked it, tell a friend. If you didn't like it, shut up. Have a great night. Safe home, everybody.